So Tycoon has been doing a lot of balance changes recently, as all of us already know, and in the previous video I went over how strong the vehicles are after the buff. However, today I will actually be going over the boats, because a lot of them have also received a ton of balance changes, specifically the USS Douglas and the USS Independence, which actually make them very viable choices in the meta. Once again, since the USS Independence was kind of overshadowed by the Zumwalt, that's no longer really going to be the case. So firstly, taking a look at the PR206, which has received a few changes. So first of all, its turrets were reworked, and basically what this means is that they added more clip size to them, which essentially allows them to shoot for a much longer time. So right here, as you guys can see, I'm able to do some pretty decent damage to the Zumwalt, but it's nothing too special if I'm gonna be completely honest with you here. However, if we actually take a look at the damage of these torpedoes individually, their damage is also pretty good. However, keep in mind that they're all over the place with their AI, and just in general, they're not gonna be very viable just due to the fact that they're not actually hitting their target like they're supposed to. And right here, if we test these torpedoes against something like the Bore, on average you're gonna be doing around 1/4 of its health with one torpedo. But once again, a perfect example was showcased how these things are extremely unreliable, because 2 of these torpedoes just flew away. But anyway, the next Vic which was also changed is the thermal, because they have buffed its turret magazine size. This is a pretty simple one. I don't really have to showcase any damage changes since there were none. However, this thing is definitely going to be able to take a decent chunk of health out of the Zumwalt, so that is definitely a pretty good change. It's nothing too special though. But anyway, the USS Independence is the next vehicle on the list, because they buffed its cannon damage. So essentially now you'll be able to take down at least 50% of the Zumwalt's health on average, which is also pretty good. They've also buffed the fire rate as far as I know. However, if we take a look at its damage against air vehicles, this thing's definitely going to be really good, because on average it's going to be able to actually two-shot most of the planes and helicopters in this game. So that's definitely really good for a vehicle with an insane fire rate. However, if we take a look at its damage against the tanks, this thing is pretty insane, and it's going to be able to evaporate them in just under 2 seconds or somewhere like that. And if we take a look at its damage against the ground vehicles, it's not going to be that good. I don't think that was buffed. However, it is still gonna be pretty reasonable overall. Now, the next vehicle which was unfortunately nerfed is the USS Zumwalt, and you guys are probably not gonna like this. As you previously remember, this cannon used to basically be able to shred every single boat in around 6 hits, or at least get them really low. Now, it will be able to do around 9% of damage per hit, which means that on average it's gonna be able to at least take away like 60% from the person's health. But if we take a look at the damage of these cannons against air vehicles, they won't quite be able to one-tap something like an F-35B, and the same results can also be seen against the Superhind. So these cannons are definitely not going to be that amazing against air, considering the fact that they're also extremely inaccurate. However, another set of changes which were also made is that the damage is no longer as good against tanks and ground vehicles. I previously remember this thing being able to kill them in around 2 to 3 shots. Now it takes around 3 to 4, if not 5 sometimes, against the much more powerful vehicles. So this thing is still really good as a whole, but this nerf is definitely a little bit questionable though. Do let me know in the comment section down below, are you happy with this nerf? Now, the next vehicle which also was changed is the USS Douglas. They reworked its front cannon damage and buffed the missile launcher. So that is a pretty huge buff which they've actually done. So first of all, the cannons are now going to be able to actually do some solid damage against the USS Zumwalt, being able to get it down to around half health on average. However, with this, these cannons are also extremely good at actually taking down air vehicles, because one shot will be able to get them extremely low, but on average you will be 2-tapping most of them. However, there will be times where you can actually 1-tap. Now, if we take a look at the overall damage against the tanks, this thing will actually be able to 4-shot the TO-55, which is just absolute insanity in terms of damage. However, if we take a look at the damage against the short, it's not going to be that good against that and the ground vehicles. It wasn't really buffed against it, but it's still extremely good as a cannon. Now, the next change which was also made to it is that the missile launcher is now much more faster, so these things will no longer really have a huge animation which slows them down, but with this you actually be able to attack targets from a very far distance. This thing will be able to actually 2-shot most tanks in the game. It will be able right here to get the TO-55 to extremely low health after 2 of these, and it will also be able to 2-shot the Striker Shorad. With this is pretty basic, we already know, but it will be be able to one-shot the F-35B and the Mi-24 Super Hind. So honestly, I am really happy with these balance changes for the Douglas. I think this might have actually become one of my favorite ships in the game now because of these changes. And then lastly, the PGO-2 was also buffed in its minigun damage. Now it will be able to shred air vehicles extremely quickly. I believe it used to be already really good at that, but I think they buffed it even more in this update, and we can definitely see that from the performance against both ground vehicles and air vehicles. You'll be able to shred them extremely quickly. But anyway, for the time being, those were all the changes which are actually made in this update for the boats. The last set of changes are actually planes. I'll probably be keeping you guys updated on that, but there is a lot more to cover on them. Anyway, I will see you guys in the next video. Have a great rest of your day, and thank you so much to all my channel members.